Krithi. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good, thanks.
So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about your book, and feel free to add anything else at the end.
Okay, sure.
So first of all, what is your book and what inspired you to write it?
All right. My book is about a girl named Hayley, and she's 12, so she's on the cover. And it's really about her struggle to speak up for an eastern coyote during hunting season. She's just moved to a new town. She also has recently gotten a dog, so it has a domestic dog theme as well. But her domestic dog has attracted a friend, and she comes to know him as Al and get kind of close to him in terms of gets comfortable because he keeps visiting. And she has to do her best to speak up, even though she's very quiet, and try to make her voice heard and connect with some local politicians in town and try to do something because there's hunting and she doesn't agree with it.
Yeah, that's very cool. I'm glad you're writing books to raise awareness. What inspired you to write it?
So the inspiration is really all from real life. It's not completely, but largely a lot of it is based on getting my own dog and having a really strong bond with a dog. Later in life, I researched coyotes during college and learned a lot about their plight, and especially in the past being hunted on a mass level in the West, and how that's what kind of got them moving east toward where I live in New England. And so I had definitely had a lot of sympathy for coyotes and always wanted to have them as a character in a book. One thing I didn't mention is in real life, my pet dog had a boyfriend who was very adventurous, and he actually inspired the coyote character in my story.
That is so sweet.
Yeah, I know. It's a really sweet story.
Oh, so what would you like to tell all the future authors out there about coyotes and awareness?
Yeah, so lots of things. So you said authors, coyotes, and awareness. So I have like lots of ideas on all those three things. I would say for authors to definitely read books about animals, read books that interest you, and read some of the classics. As far as coyotes and awareness, I do have some things in the back of the book in terms of some things you can do. I would say for sure read up about them and understand them. In Kai News, just in January, February, we did an article about coyotes where we interviewed an urban ecologist, and she dispelled a lot of myths and talked a lot about their behavior. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm out and about, I hear things like, oh, we have a coyote and he's trying to lure my dog. Or I have a coyote who is stalking me on my walk. And I just always want to know, like, how do they know the intentions of a coyote? And I think it's really important to kind of talk to the experts who are studying them and kind of know the basis for some of those behaviors, because oftentimes it will be like wanting to escort people or pets or dogs away from a denning site. And so to have the facts before you do any awareness is really important to study up. Not only, these are nonfiction, these are fiction, but fictional books behind me, but there's a book called God's Dog by Hope Ryden. She was a naturalist who observed them and recorded a lot of detail about how they live in families in the wild. And then there's all kinds of organizations that are working for coyotes that I have in the back of the book, and kind of things you can do to help. One of them is Project Coyote. In fact, they list there's 7 states that still have coyote hunting contests. That if you live in that state, especially, you're in a good position to speak up against that, whether it's making a phone call, writing a letter, attending a meeting. And there's others. There's Humane Society of the United States often works against those issues as well. National Wildlife Federation, Living with Wolves. So to check out what's going on and where they need help. Anybody in the country can make their voices heard when it's something involving federal lands. So if there's predators, any kind of predator being hunted on federal lands, anybody can speak up, because that's, federal is national government, applies to all of us. And just because if you're under 18, it doesn't mean you can't make your voice heard. I know you can't vote, but it doesn't mean you can't make your voice heard. This is everybody's country and everybody's land, and wildlife is something that we all interact with. So we should all make our voices heard.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That was great. So speaking of all of that about different myths about coyotes, what would you like people to know about coyotes in general?
I think the biggest thing I would like people to know and learn about is the family structure of coyotes, that they're very family oriented, a lot like wolves, a lot like people. And so they raise their families together, the mates, they mate for life, and they raise the puppies together. They take turns feeding and bringing back food, and they form really strong bonds as families. They play, puppies together and parents with puppies. Anytime you hear someone talk about a pack, a lot of times in the news we hear like it's a scary thing, but that's just another word for family. That's a coyote family. And they'll often be animals in the coyote family who are babysitters while the parents are out hunting. And it's just really interesting. I think they're really cool animals and really family oriented, and it's something I can relate to a lot, having my own family.
Mm-hmm. That's so sweet that coyotes are just like humans. I think that's really cool.
In a lot of ways. I mean, they're different in a lot of ways too, but as far as the families go, I think there's a lot of love within their families.
Yeah. So getting more into your book, what did you mean by the term real life magic, and how does it relate to animal shelters and getting pets in the book?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because that came up right in the beginning of the book. Hayley actually stumbles into a psychic medium who starts telling her all these predictions about these dogs and how these dogs will need her. And she tells her about 3 kinds of magic. So the first one is like supernatural magic. It's when you connect with a different dimension, like if someone's talking to someone who's passed over and on another dimension, in psychic mediumship, that was one kind of magic that she refers to. The second one was rare events where coincidences happen and these strange events just come together. And the third one is love. So when Hayley gets her dog from the shelter, really all three types of those magic is involved. I mean, the medium predicts it, and then the dog is actually from another state and was rescued by a good Samaritan who actually lives near Hayley and brought the dog home to the animal shelter because she already had, dogs at home and couldn't have another dog. And that's where Hayley found the dog, even though it was from a neighbor on the next street. It really does take an animal shelter to bring pets and people together. And of course, they totally hit it off.
Yeah.
And they have this bond, this love between them. So there's 3 kinds of magic involved. And the shelter, I really wanted to write about a shelter because I think it's really, they're so important for bringing people and pets together. And it happened for me in real life, and I wanted to get it in the story.
Aww. So speaking about it happening in your real life, do you think there's real life magic in the world?
Absolutely. So much of this, like I said, is based on my life. And so I got my dog Gretchen. So I don't think I've showed you a picture of Gretchen yet. In fact, I did write a short memoir about Gretchen. And this is actually a story about getting through life after she passed away and getting through that grief. But that's a picture when she was older. But I just want to show you a picture of Gretchen when she was a little baby, shortly after I got her.
Oh, so sweet.
Yeah, she just, I mean, you can see, Krithi, how she would cheer you up if you're going through, family changes and moves and things like that.
Absolutely.
So all those things, all those 3 kinds of magic really did happen to me because Gretchen, the whole story of Greta in the book, the pet dog, was based on Gretchen. She did come from Rhode Island, and she was being sold in a baby carriage with her litter mates. And some young kids actually decided to buy her as a birthday present for another kid. And of course, the parents, when they heard about it, they said, well, we can't have a dog. And they were about to leave her in a parking lot. That's when the Good Samaritan, Claudia, took her home to the neighborhood where I lived. And then the next day took her to the shelter. And the next day, very coincidentally, in a very strange event, I was able to get my mother to take me down there and find Gretchen.
Oh,
yeah, so it's that serendipity. So
yeah,
big believer in 3 kinds of magic.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really heartwarming story. So in the author's note, you said that some domestic and wild dogs were inspired from your dogs. Was that Gretchen?
Yeah, that was Gretchen. And I mentioned her boyfriend is who inspired Hugo.
Mhm.
I'm going to show you a picture of Hugo. Hugo was always waiting on our back deck for her,
Uh-huh.
but I have a better, brighter picture.
Oh, that's so sweet. He's so cute.
So he was a dog who we used to walk with, like a group of lady walkers in our neighborhood. And but when he was doing his rounds with her, with the walkers one day, he saw Gretchen out in our front yard with me and decided to let his lady walkers keep going. He wanted to meet Gretchen.
Oh.
And they he just took her on lots of adventures. So she definitely had some adventures. We had rivers near our neighborhood that they would go and come back, and there was always like mud on his underside. Or burrs in his tail or snowballs in his fur, but it wasn't like I didn't feel like he was neglected or feel sorry for him. He was just having a lot of fun outside, having a lot of adventures and going out with Gretchen quite a bit. So they inspired the story, and I definitely feel like I became one of them as a kid and was able to have a lot of quiet time down on the ground with them. They used to, in the summertime, dig a lot of holes and just lay in the holes. And I just remember hanging out with them quite a bit. And yeah, it was really important that I had them in that I dedicated the story to them. So this book is dedicated to Gretchen and Hugo, who showed me 3 kinds of magic.
Aw. So you also mentioned that these dogs were like home to you. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so getting back to kind of hanging out with them and having a lot of quiet moments and feeling really comfortable and bonding with them, I think felt like a certain home when you feel that comfortable in life, when you have a friend that's close, that's that close. And so I always kind of equated them with home. And then like later in life, if maybe I felt off track or wasn't fulfilling my purpose, whether it was for the animals or in personal life, I kind of always thought back to them. And there was one certain time when I was coming home from a trip from an animal conference when I thought about the dogs and really felt like I needed to kind of get back to basics and maybe write some stories about them. And I think it was just this vision in my mind of them running over a hill together, like in our neighborhood. And I wanted to make sure I wrote a story about them.
That's very nice. So what do you think younger people can do to help coyotes?
Yeah, so I would get back to some of those ideas, go on Project Coyote on the website. Definitely make sure you read some books about them and the work of some urban ecologists. There are some good websites like Coyote Research. I think it's called Urban Coyote Research, and Eastern Coyote Research are 2 websites I found that tell you about some of the habits, shows you some photos, shows some data on the radio, on the collaring they do, where they kind of track the animals in different neighborhoods in cities. They track them a lot. And so getting back to the families, it shows like two coyotes who are bonded and mated, who like, and how they're hanging out together like all the time. So you'll see like a red dot and a green dot, and they're always in the same spot around, say, Chicago is one example I found. And so I think you get a really good idea for their habits when you see the data from scientists. So I would say to definitely brush up on that and some of the literature, like the good books. The different organizations like Project Coyote and Humane Society of the United States have really good facts about them and ways you can help. And I would say take them up on, a lot of them are really quick action alerts where you could write a quick letter and let people, the powers that be, know how you feel. And I also say in the book, if you're not finding, like if you know of an issue that's local where, coyotes are being targeted or there's a contest for hunting, to let these groups know, because they need people who are local to let them know about things going on as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's very motivational for a lot of kids around there, I'm sure. And of course, everyone reading. So speaking about your book, who do you relate to the most, and in what ways do you relate to that character?
I definitely relate to Hayley. probably more than anybody. And that's why I wrote this book from her perspective, because I relate mostly to a human who's had a strong bond with a dog and wants to help wild animals. I did consider writing this story from the point of view of the coyote, and I just felt I decided not to go forward with that because I felt like I couldn't speak for a wild animal, even though I can relate to their family values. I didn't feel like I could really relate to how they would think, or, certainly couldn't put words to that. So I decided to do it from Hayley's point of view.
Yeah, I could see that from all of your stories. I could definitely see you and Hayley. So what would you do, like in Hayley's perspective as well, what would you do if someone you knew talked about hunting wild dogs or coyotes?
And I was like right next to them in a social situation and I heard them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because I have had situations where I've heard people talk about hunting. And basically I would just try to feel them out and say, where do you go and why do you like to hunt coyotes? And it's difficult to kind of keep an even keel about it because I have strong feelings, but I also believe that we should get facts from every side and try to understand everybody's perspective. So I want to know why they think, why they do it. And I would just keep an open mind at first and hear what they have to say. Coyote hunting is one of, you probably know, I worked for different animal welfare and animal protection organizations, and it was one of the more distressing issues out there because it's just, I don't see an argument for it. A lot of times I hear that they want to protect the deer populations because they might be deer hunters. I see from the side of coyote hunters, at least online in the different forums I've seen, it's almost like a greed and very, it's almost like a hatred that I see against coyotes. And so it's really troubling to me. But anybody who's around me, I would just feel them out and want to hear more and try to have a civil conversation.
Yeah, that's very responsible. So moving on from all of this heavy stuff, more of a fun question. What is your favorite breed of coyote and why?
Oh, well, definitely the Eastern coyotes because they're out here in New England. They're basically 10% dog and 30% wolf. And a lot of people don't know that, but they're different. They're a different makeup than coyotes in the West. They're actually, they're like a mix between timber wolves and dogs. And so it's basically a result of coyotes coming from the West and breeding with timber wolves in Eastern Canada. And then coming south into New England in about the 1960s and kind of breeding with dogs on the way. So we have a bigger, different animal here in New England than people out in California do.
Wow, that's very cool. So you seem to know a lot about coyotes. So what is your favorite fact or piece of information about coyotes?
I think it's definitely the raising the young and mating for life is kind of the coolest fact to me. The only other one that like kind of competes with that is their adaptability and their scrappiness. Like they can survive anywhere. They can survive in cities, suburbs, woods. They'll eat anything. They're omnivores.
Yeah.
They've been observed sneaking into like Quiznos restaurants and eating pizza and it's eating, like, I guess they love watermelon on farms. And so the fact that they can live anywhere and change and adapt to different conditions, I think is really admirable.
Oh, that's very sweet. So again, speaking about the whole book, what was the writing process like?
Oh, it was really long and hard, actually. This was my first book that I've ever written, and it took 5 years to, I know it was a lot of different drafts. And so my background is really animal welfare, and so I don't have an English degree, and I really needed to revisit all these books and story structure and go to a lot of trainings with it's called the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and really learn the craft. So I was learning as I went with this. and I was doing a lot of different drafts and getting a lot of feedback from other middle grade writers. I was getting a lot of feedback from different agents and editors, and getting some coaching on outlining and just making sure the structure was right. So it was probably 10 different drafts and 5 years.
Wow. Oh my gosh. It's a lot of work.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it is. But it was like a learning process as well as a writing process.
Yeah, that's very cool. So if you could tell a possible reader out there one thing about your book to get them to read it, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that I think it might open their eyes to some of this magic that I'm talking about. And every reader who I meet or sign the book for, I tell them to look for real life magic in their own life, and then I'm sure they'll find it if they have an open mind. And I hope they find a lot of it. So I don't know about you, but when I read a book, I like it to kind of open my mind that those things might happen to me too, and especially good, positive things.
Mhm.
And so I hope it will give them some sense of wonder about those things happening in the world.
Yeah, definitely. I think your book is great because it teaches a lot of younger audiences that it's important to speak up and do what they think is right. So I especially like that about your book.
Thank you. That's definitely one thing I wanted to get across.
So any last things you would like to say to anyone interested in reading your book?
For anybody wanting to be an author, one thing, in addition to reading really good books, is to make sure you have some good experiences, because I find in different authors I've kind of followed and listened to and seen speak, you really need not only to be a good reader and know what it takes to write a good book and what makes a good book, you need to learn the craft. So whether you do English or creative writing in college or through workshops like I did, and you also need to have a lot of cool experiences. And the only way you kind of get that is through living life and saying yes to things, taking trips, joining clubs at school, doing after school things, learning instruments. I mean, I would just say, like, say yes to things so that you have things to write about.
Yeah, definitely.
So which is why I think your story is so cool, Krithi, going to India and writing your own stories. And by the way, I just bought your book. I'm really looking forward to getting the sushi.
Thank you so much.
Sushi, what is it? Sushi something adventures?
For Sushi Adventures.
Super Sushi Adventures. Just bought that one. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. So once again, thank you so much for your time. Your book was excellent, and I think it's going to bring a lot of awareness to wild dogs and coyotes out there, because they are so much more than what they seem to be. So yeah.
I agree. Thank you, Krithi.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate the interview. Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you too. Bye.
Good luck. Bye.